and that they are off mute when they wish to speak, but they're on mute when not speaking. So welcome to members of staff and members of the public and patients who are joining us today. We're going to make available the recording of this to others after the event. And we'd like to get as many questions as we possibly can. So I'd encourage you, well, I'm going to break halfway through our presentations to ask for people's questions, and I'll be trying to field them to different members of the board. And we'll have time at the end as well for questions. But if you want to raise anything as we're going along, please use the chat function and we'll try and get to them. And if there are any questions that we fail to get to, we will endeavour to answer them separately and post up answers on the website. So the AGM is a kind of an opportunity for reflection, and we're reflecting on the year to April 2021. I'm going to leave most of the review of the year to the various executive directors who are talking, but I thought I would offer up a few reflections myself about what has been a highly unusual year for everyone, for all of us individually, for organisations and for the world as a whole. My reflection was that we probably won't be able to do a good review of the year for a number of years. It'll take a number of years for us to get a really clear perspective on last year. But for me, there were, and thinking about the RNOH, there were three words that stood out. So I wanted to share my three words. The first one was versatility. It was the year in which in wave one, if any of you can remember that far back, we became one of the largest trauma hospitals at no notice, doing something that we haven't done at Stanmore for 30 years, with fantastic outcomes, with really, really good outcomes. We did that on the turn of a dice, as it were. We then became, in wave two, a general acute hospital and we pivoted towards caring for people with COVID and decompressing the system and our partners in North Central London. Many of our organisation, many people in the organisation pivoted to working at home remotely. Everyone shifted to working in new and different ways. And for me, the agility with which people made the changes was really, really very impressive. And I think that versatility is the testament of capability. So if a less capable organisation, I think, would not have been able to make all those changes and do them so well. Second word for me is teamwork. The teamwork across our staff in the trust was extraordinary, both in navigating all the challenges. There were new teams formed, and old teams had to work in a new way. But if you think of the wider team, the RNOH is a web of partnerships which make up our larger team and family. And that larger team was called into action. So our volunteers, on whom we rely so heavily, all of the charities that support us, from Radio Broccoli to the Barbara Buss, Aspire, Scap Bone Cancer, Disability Foundation, and of course the RNOH charity, which raised 1.2 million for us during the year. And then if you think about teamwork as being larger than that, I think this will be the year where the RNOH will look back and say it became part of the wider health system team in two ways. One is through the mutual aid that we gave, and a lot of it was coming from Stanmore, whether it was providing people to help staff ITUs or the Nightingale, or whether it was through taking on the burden of work that freed people up in other hospitals to care for people with COVID, or whether indeed it was the manufacturing of PPE and visors. There was a huge amount of mutual aid that emanated from Stanmore, and I think has been hugely well received. But equally, we've had formal partnerships, which we haven't had with some of our neighbouring trusts, so they're all free. In thinking about the non-tertiary work and how we might work together around Chase Farm. and UCL Health Alliance, which is the provider collaborative, which declaration of interest I also chair. We're working closely with them on how we can take a larger role within MSK and how we can pool some of our supporting services, and that started during this last year. So in many ways, I think teamwork will be another real hallmark of 2021. And my final word is going to be resilience. So we went from wave to wave, and the waves in between waves, where we picked up all of elective recovery, the whole vaccination program, and no let up in any of the pressures on all of that. And we continued throughout to provide the incredible specialist MSK services that we're rightly well known for, and which during this year got us ranked as one of the world's top 10 best hospitals in orthopedics, which is a fantastic compliment to everyone who works for the RNOH. So really, I guess my first message is to thank, on behalf of the board, all members of staff for the incredible versatility, the incredible teamwork, and the outstanding resilience that's been shown over this very, very difficult year. That's one side of the coin. Our patients are on the other side of the coin, and actually those three words apply equally to them. They had to show versatility with new virtual approaches to outpatients. They had to show versatility to adapt to some very difficult new guidelines and rules on visiting, given infection prevention control. We've even thrown changes in car parking at people, so a huge amount of versatility shown by our patients. Teamwork as well, that either working with us directly or through our supporting charities and partners, our patients have been with us to redesign services and to work on how we improve things, and we're rightly proud, I think, of the level of patient engagement that we've managed to achieve, and we're thankful for our patients wanting to work with us to help shape our services, and that was a big feature of last year and will be a big feature going forward. And then the final one is resilience, and obviously the big collateral damage from the pandemic is waiting times. And that waiting times sounds like one of those neutral things to say, but what it means is people suffering in pain, and the frustration that comes with that. And we are acutely aware of that, and we're working incredibly hard to try and work our way through the backlog. And I thank all of our patients for their resilience that's come through all of that waiting. So those are my three words and my two sets of thanks, and I am going to leave it there. I've got one piece of business to do at this stage, which is to ask if anyone had any issues or corrections to make to the minutes that have been circulated. Now is the time to put up your hand. I'm getting a forest of shaking heads, which is a good thing. And so with that, I'm delighted to pass over to our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Leela Dinner.
Hello. It's very hard when you can't see your audience, but anyway, I don't know who's here, but anyway, my name is Leela Dinner. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at RNOH. It's really lovely to be able to talk to people, and I think Dominic has probably given the overview of the year from a clinical perspective, which I probably can't do a better job of, to be honest. I think in essence, thanks, can I have the first slide? In essence, it's been a really busy year, and I think that's reflected by the extreme pressures that COVID-19 continues to put on healthcare. Despite the relaxation of lockdown and the restrictions to the rest of the world, those restrictions still apply within healthcare settings, so we still need to use masks and personal protective equipment, and we still have a huge impact from the stricter infection control guidance, and we can't have as many patients on our sites as we used to at any one time. And we're really conscious, acutely conscious of the impact on the changes to the rules around visiting. I'm sorry, can you just move the slide on for me? Thank you. Acutely conscious of the impact of the restrictions around visiting, and we review those on a regular basis as we review changes to infection control guidance. The focus of the work over the last year has really been around trying to recover the backlog position. So really trying to get patients back in for surgery in as quick a way as we possibly can. And as Dominic has referred to, one of the major changes for us, that's fine, you can stop there. One of the major changes for us is has been our focus not just on our own patients, but on those patients coming from other hospitals. And the reason that's really important is that the national backlog of orthopaedic and MSK, the waiting times for patients across all of our specialist services has been enormous, and that burden of pain and disability doesn't just affect our own patients, but patients in a specialty that we provide a leading status in. So we've taken that very seriously, and that's been a real change to how we've worked over the last year. Immediately after Christmas, and this perhaps if I have the rest of the text for this slide, that immediately after Christmas was the numbers of COVID positive patients. If people remember, it was the beginning of wave 2. The number of COVID positive patients went up very, very rapidly, and we opened our intensive care unit to COVID patients. These were really very, very unwell patients requiring very expert and complex care. We took 20 patients in, some of whom stayed for quite a long time in our intensive care unit, and we converted 2 of our wards to COVID positive wards, taking patients who were recovering from COVID from other hospitals. This allowed other hospitals to continue to admit patients who needed more acute care, but it also was a really amazing example of this rapid spinning on a dice. We converted surgical wards to medical wards, and many of our staff did things that they haven't done for many years, and they did it really well. We had a real focus on quality and safety during this time, trying to make sure that we collaborated with other hospitals to make sure that what we delivered, this medical care we delivered, was of the highest quality. I'd like to say a thanks, unusually, I'd like to say a thanks specifically to UCH for helping to support us with the medical cover. What was nice is that during that time we maintained, despite everything, and as Dominic has referred to, we've maintained throughout that time our most critical services, which are not delivered elsewhere. So our cancer care, our spinal cord injury, our complex spinal surgery and bone infection care, which are not offered anywhere else, we were able to maintain throughout that. As that wave went away and we were able to return to allowing elective surgery back in again. The period since April 20 has really been totally focused on this. We wanted to really get back to levels of care beyond those we delivered in 2019, pre-COVID, and we were aiming for levels of about 110% our normal activity. This has been a really tall ask. Staff had worked very, very hard, as Dominic said, lots of changes last year, lots of having to learn to do things differently, which is both stimulating but also tiring. And we were as much victims of the pingdemic as the rest of the world. So we had higher levels perhaps of staff sickness than we might have wished. But in the 5 months from April to August, we have seen over 91,000 outpatients. And what's really pleasing is that the virtual ways of doing things which we learned were possible last year, we've retained in over a third of the cases. And the impact of that is that actually it really does reduce the journey time for our patients, reduce the time that our patients take to actually see a doctor, nurse, therapist, and that can really positively impact on the patient's experience of of interacting with our services. We've also done a huge number of operations and pain procedures, and really pleasingly 25% of these have been as day cases. That's a lower rate than we would normally run at, and that's not surprising because the first cohorts of patients who were done as elective surgery are those patients who are most urgently in need, and disproportionately they had more major surgery. So what we've seen is that the general level of surgery and acuity, the illness levels of the patients needing care, has been higher in this period from April to August, and that again places strain, I think, on our staff to be able to manage those patients with higher needs and people who've been waiting for surgery longer and who are more anxious about surgery and more uncertain about the time they've had to wait and the impact of their care. So we've spent a lot of time talking and listening to patients, and all our teams, I know, have been very involved with actually delivering, I think, what sort of mental health support really to our patients, and listening to patients on the wards and in our outpatient settings. I think this aspect of our role as a national specialist provider is really important for us. We have a role not just to our local population, but to the specialty of orthopaedic and MSK services more widely, and we've continued to work with teams in all sorts of ways. Sometimes people have brought their cases to us and sent the patients to us, and sometimes they've come with their patients to operate here. We ran a massive vaccination program across the whole trust, and it's really pleasing. We vaccinated over 90% of all our staff, and we have seen staff levels of sickness reduce as a result of that. We know many people are hugely anxious about vaccination, and that is no different for healthcare staff. We also vaccinated patients within the hospital who were either inpatients or vulnerable patients. And we have had a series of webinars to try to listen and answer questions and listen to concerns, to try to explore the benefits of becoming vaccinated. One of the other things we've done is to develop a whole range of new processes which weren't needed pre-COVID. They include identifying those patients who are most vulnerable, who needed shielding and needed protection and or vaccination, to ensure that there is a review process for those patients who unfortunately are waiting longer on the waiting list, to make sure that they don't come to any clinical harm, and most importantly and repeatedly to prioritise our waiting lists over and over again to try to make sure that those most urgently in need are seen first. So I'm not going to, if you could just bring up the text for this one, thank you. I think the most important things about how we're going to do things that we've learned that we want to take forward is really we're doing a lot of work on changing the way we design our clinical pathways. And I think for any of you who may be long-standing patients of the trust, you may have found aspects of your pathway through care with us different. We really think it's incredibly important that every step of your journey actually adds value to your care. And I think as we learned from the impact of virtual visiting or seeing patients in a different way, some of the ways we traditionally did things probably don't do that. We also want to use our resources as well as possible. So we will be working increasingly with our patient group to get your input into designing and redesigning pathways, and I hope that many of you will want to get involved in that. We are also bringing in some really important digital platforms to help improve the care and the services that we deliver. The two most important ones are an electronic prescribing and medicines management system, which is otherwise known as the drug chart. So you might be familiar with the paper drug chart you've had at your bedside, and an electronic system is shown to make a big difference to medicine safety. We've got a good strong medicine safety system here, but I think this really helps to audit and to track what's going on with medicines. And the other thing is a digital platform to improve our collection of outcomes, and that's hugely important. We're a site where we want to use that for increasingly for research, to share the learning that we have from the surgeries that we do and the care that we offer, and absolutely vitally for us is to shape developments and innovations in the future in the field of orthopaedic and MSK medicine. So in summary, a really busy year. I think we have done a significant amount of elective surgery, and really proud of our staff for all of the reasons that Dominic alluded to. I think we're proud very much that we've shared access with those most in need of care through mutual aid in various ways. And that's definitely a new direction of travel for us, but something that's very important. A strengthened focus, if anything, on safety and quality despite COVID-19. And I would say perhaps because of COVID-19, it's a higher risk environment to be operating in. And I think we've done that with great kind of energy. And I know you'll hear later in this about, I think, what are quite exciting times ahead. So thank you very much. Nice to see everybody.
Thanks so much, Leela. And I will take a question now. Jane.
Well, I mainly wanted to congratulate Leela and the whole team, because it was a really impressive effort put in involving everybody who works at RNOH. And to have had no never events and only 2 serious harm when one is undertaking practice that one's not used to, again, is a huge testament to people's ability to adapt as required. So I was very, very impressed by that and can only say well done. I just wanted to check, because I read the report, our annual report yesterday, and there were 2 things which stood out for me. One was the pre-admission for complex cases and the assessment that we make of relative stability to support patients when they've got home, and also the dementia screening. And I wasn't aware of either of those. And again, just in brief, Leela, perhaps just say a few words about that. But well done.
Thank you, Jane. And I think staff are, it does mean something to say thank you to staff. And we have tried to say thank you staff as much as we can and continue to do that. So dementia screening is now a routine part of the pre-assessment service. It's partly as a result of an aging population. It's partly as a result of, I think, a much greater awareness that collectively the community of surgery has about the impact of surgery and anaesthesia on cognitive state. It can be very, very short-lived, that you have a very short-lived period of a little bit of confusion, perhaps after an operation. That's not at all unusual. It's a very disorientating environment, I think, to be in hospital. People coming in for surgery, particularly, very anxious and high levels of anxiety. We try hard to assuage, but that is that can also contribute to that sense of perhaps disorientation. So it's very, very important that we are able to screen better so that we can put things in place to try and minimise the impact of all of these unsettling aspects for patients. And I think that the place that relatives and visitors hold in being able to keep patients, I think, positive on their journey through a hospital, it can't be overestimated. It's an enormous impact to have your relative, somebody who's closest to you, nearest and dearest, actually matters hugely. And no amount of compassionate care, no amount of sort of tenderness actually that staff can give patients really fully replicates that or replaces that. But I think that in the context of trying to keep the hospital a COVID negative surgical site so we can continue doing elective surgery as safely as possible, we balance that risk of who can come on site. And try and look, I think, as compassionately as possible at requests for exceptions to be made, and exceptions are made on an occasional basis. Parents, of course, one parent is allowed, of course, to come with their child for surgery, and we do, as everybody knows, quite a significant amount of paediatric care here, and any adult who is more vulnerable, we would absolutely want to encourage relatives or visitors to come and see them. I think what's difficult is the longer staying patients. It can be quite difficult for.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for the question, and thank you for that piece, Leela. I'm sure that there may be some more questions as we go along, but I'm going to move us on now to our workforce, and that means Laura, our Chief People Officer, is taking over.
Thanks very much, Dominic. And again, nice to see everybody, and welcome to our AGM. So from a staff experience perspective, it's fair to say that looking after our staff is crucial if we want to provide the best patient care. I'm actually happy to go without slides for this session because I haven't got sort of particular slides, so it might be easier just to see everybody actually. Thank you. So generally, RNOH has good outcomes in relation to staff experience, and over recent years, staff have been reporting positively in the annual staff survey about their level of engagement within the organisation. And we were delighted that in the staff survey that was done at the end of last year, since our last AGM, that we came highest for the NHS hospital trusts in relation to staff engagement scores within our staff survey, and second highest for quality of care. That's a real achievement, and does reflect the fact that our staff are broadly really genuinely happy with the experience they have here and their opportunities for development, the support they get from their managers, and the way that the organisation looks after their health and well-being, which is obviously fantastic. It also includes how staff rate team working, and perhaps even more importantly, the quality of care that they feel that they're able to provide. So it's so important for us. There have been two areas in the staff survey that for some time we haven't been performing quite so well on, and that is focused around equality, diversity and inclusion, and bullying and harassment, ensuring that we have that safe environment without any pockets at all of bullying and harassment. And these are areas that we've been focused on driving up improvements in the last year specifically. So we have recruited a staff health and wellbeing lead, which has been generously funded by the RNOH charity. And we've also introduced a new role, introducing a equality and diversity lead post, who's helped to sort of galvanise the work we've been doing from an E&D perspective. And these posts have been made it able for us to be able to drive up a range of actions that will hopefully continue to see further improvements and will be reflected in our staff survey that we're going to be coming back round to again, our annual one, starting in October this year. In relation to the actions that we've taken forwards, we've introduced accountable panels and diverse panels, which will hopefully mean that we start to see a greater level of diversity across our senior leadership posts, because we do have diversity within the organisation, but less diversity at the senior leadership levels, and we want to obviously change that and make sure that we've got proper representation across all levels within the organisation. We've had the chance to, although we've had to turn to virtual methods, we have been able to celebrate events and celebrate equality diversity events. And we've also run a range of events really aimed at supporting staff health and wellbeing, with webinars focused on things such as fatigue, burnout, long COVID, adjusting to remote working, and so much more to support our staff as they've faced the new challenges they have experienced over the last year or so. In relation to the impact of COVID in the last year, like for all NHS organisations, it's continued to present a significant challenge, as you've already heard today. More recently, we've had our staff really supporting and needing to turn to work very differently, and we've absolutely sought to support staff as they have stepped up and, as has been described, providing that mutual aid elsewhere, and also working very differently within our own organisation. We've continued to test asymptomatic staff every 2 weeks so that we can remain as COVID-free as possible, and have also introduced lateral flow tests in the intervening periods for those staff coming on site to ensure that we're able to run as absolute safe services as we can for our staff and for our patients. We have, as Leela had pointed out, vaccinated in excess of 90% of our staff, and that has meant that although we saw prior to vaccination higher levels of staff absence, that's been much better controlled and managed more recently since the vaccination programme has been undertaken and has been so successful. And we are managing to work and function very well with the slightly, much smaller levels now of staff absences that we are seeing. And we've worked really closely across our systems as well to support and welcome returners and volunteers to the organisation to assist both during the height of the pandemic and subsequently as we have a greater focus on elective recovery. So as we start to work towards our new normal, we're starting to think about taking the benefits gained from the new ways of working that we've experienced during the pandemic. So things such as far greater opportunities for hybrid working, greater use of technology, working more collaboratively across our systems, coming away from red tape where we're able to make it a better place for staff to work and work across systems. And we've been able to move to some of our corporate services being offered as shared service models, and that will enable greater resilience in the future. So, for example, we're joining forces with some of the NCL trusts, North Central London trusts, in the provision of recruitment, payroll and occupational health services, for example. We've undertaken a programme of modernisation in respect of the technology we use to support staff and the management of staff across the organisation. So in the last year, we've introduced a wellbeing channel which can be downloaded for all of our staff, and they can have it available on their mobile phones. And that has a wealth of information and access to resources that support staff with all aspects of their physical and mental wellbeing. We've also introduced a new app that our doctors can use to book into locum shifts, making it easier for them to see what shifts need covering. And this helps to replace quite complex paper trails and makes it far easier for our colleagues across the organisation. Our next steps, we're looking to introduce a better learning management system that will make it easier for staff to access online development. They already can access it to some degree here, but it will make it even easier for staff to be able to access development across the organisation, and also when they're on their mobile phones and away from home. We've got work underway to improve the spaces where staff can go to relax and to recuperate. During the pandemic, we've been so lucky as an organisation to benefit from the Wingman project, which was provision of a first-class lounge experience provided by volunteers from the airline services. And they effectively created a kind of first-class lounge within one of our unused spaces for our staff to go to. Now, as travel is starting to take up a little bit more and that service has receded, we are looking to build on that by creating a wellbeing hub on site at Stanmore, which will have access to a quiet space and a cafe-style space where staff can take a few moments away and recharge their batteries. We're continuing to reduce our level of vacancies across the trust, and we've benefited from recruitment campaigns both domestically and overseas to bring in more nursing staff where we previously had shortages, which is fantastic because we've got greater resilience within our organisation, and we've brought in some great talent from within our nursing roles. Our video showcasing RNOH 2020 was a fabulous celebration of all of our staff and the incredible work they've done. And 2021 has absolutely continued in a similar vein. Our focus for the future remains on realising our ambition to provide the very best staff experience in the NHS. We want to continue to retain the top talent that makes RNOH so special by ensuring from the moment staff join, they're really well supported and are given the opportunity to develop and thrive. Because obviously, ultimately, we know how important it is to look after our incredible staff so that in turn we can provide the very best patient care. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Can I bring in Doris?
Thank you, Dominic. I'll try and hopefully my voice will survive this, but I really wanted to commend the team on all the good work that they've done to support staff during COVID. It would have been really easy for everybody to have put in place a suite of programmes and then just forgotten about them post-COVID. But you really took the opportunity to capitalise on the changes that were put in place and continued with those moving forward, some of which Laura has alluded to. And, and it's a real success, the staff survey that Laura made reference to. And also, I guess it's also important to hear that the organisation has acknowledged the gaps and the areas that we need to improve on. And it's a real testament to the team that we've actually put resources in place to try and bring about some significant change moving forward. And the People Committee now will be able to have a greater scrutiny into some of those areas of concern. But a general well done to the team moving forward, and thank you for all of your efforts.
Thanks, Doris, and I'm glad that your voice held there. We've had a question in chat from Jimmy. Maybe I'll just read it out. EDI, I think, is a very hard ongoing improvement project, even with RES and WDS forums. Do staff have relevant networks to discuss and improve EDI for the 9 protected characteristics? And then a very nice comment at the end. I must say, as a patient, your staff are so compassionate. So Laura, about staff networks.
Yes, thank you. And thanks again. That's lovely to hear that our staff are so compassionate. It's something that's so important to us as part of what we look for in our members who come and join our team. In relation to EDI, yes, we absolutely have a Equality Achievement Network, which is thriving within the Trust. This year we had that network when we appointed from the network 2 independent chairs to take that forward. So Jade Atchler and Nicole Lowry, who are driving forward our Equality Achievement Network. And they work independently and are sort of a critical friend for us as well within the organisation. So they can also help to suggest improvements that we need to make. And we've had a number of forums where we've come together as an executive team and have heard from the Equality Achievement Network on areas of focus that they would like us to see driving forward. So absolutely there is a scope and a place for those conversations to take place and to be able to drive forwards and help to inform some of the actions that we take forwards, and with our new health equality and diversity lead to support with that. Thank you.
That's great, thank you, and thanks so much, Laura. We're going to move on now to Lucy, our Chief Operating Officer and Director of Strategy and Improvement, who's going to talk about improvement projects this last year. Over to you, Lucy.
Thanks ever so much, Dominic, and hello everybody. It's really nice to be with you today. Perhaps we could go to the next slide, please, or the one after. Thank you. So this year has been a year that we've been able to really advance in terms of improvement. It's one of the things that perhaps is a good outcome of COVID, is that the massive amount of rapid change that we had to make really accelerated our own confidence in our ability to change, and allowed staff to really get the experience of what it is like to develop a rapid improvement project, to check and measure how you're doing, and to amend afterwards if you need to. So here's a schema of our improvement strategy for the year in question, and 2 key points were to continue to build an improvement culture, developing our staff's skills across the organisation, raising the awareness of the impact of improvement across the organisation in order to generate a change culture, and reaching staff that previously we perhaps had not reached in terms of including them in the ability to suggest a change and to make a change in your area. And then the second branch of our strategy was to intensively support some particularly high impact projects that support the organisation's ability to change for the better going forward, and in particular to make our processes, clinical and non-clinical, more efficient, and in the long run so that we cost less as an organisation for either the same amount of patient care or even a greater amount of patient care for less cost, all the while improving our patients' experience and indeed our staff's experience in treating them. If we could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So, as I said, our rapid transformation to a trauma hospital in wave 1 and to a COVID response hospital with intensive and ward care given over to COVID patients in wave 2 really accelerated the confidence of our staff to undertake change. And so we established what we called our Onward to Better improvement programme to build on the learning from COVID after wave 1. And that the projects involved in that programme covered the whole patient journey and engaged staff across the organisation. We've been undertaking improvement skills training at individual team level, and this has led to particular departmental improvement programmes in some of the teams mentioned here, orthotics, Duke of Gloucester and London Irish wards, which are our two main adult wards, caring for our cancer and joint reconstruction patients and our spinal adult patients in pharmacy and in our private care team. And we've transitioned to online improvement training, 4 modules every month, open to all staff during COVID, and we'll continue with that. As I said, we tried to reach staff that we hadn't perhaps reached to involve in improvement before, and we developed and implemented the Rapid Learning Coordinator role, which is a role that was used extensively in the Nightingale Hospital to collate improvement ideas at the end of each shift and to implement them as rapidly as possible. And that has allowed a number of staff to play a central role in improvement projects that might not have been able to do so before. And in terms of raising awareness, we published articles in the British Medical Journal outlining our improvement work during COVID, and particularly our rapid implementation of virtual consultations and virtual clinics in the pandemic. Both the kind of learnings from the initial implementation and leadership reflections as well. And that first publication was one of the most downloaded articles from that publication in 2020. We also presented our work at conferences, including NHS benchmarking masterclasses and the National Orthopaedic Alliance Annual Conference. Thank you. And then in terms of high impact projects and supporting them to make progress, we, through a whole series of kind of bottom-up improvement teams and ideas, we have managed to reduce our elective length of stay on Duke of Gloucester and London Irish wards by between 25% and 30%. And that's a really substantial achievement. In each of those cases, the reduction is between 1.5 and 2 days off the median length of stay that there was. And this is taking a measure before COVID and in the most recent year. And because we've focused on elective patients in this measure, the fact that these wards constantly changed which patients they were taking during COVID, it allows for that, because the patients that we took that were not normal for us were not elective patients. So this is our normal cohorts of patients that we have managed to reduce many reduce many of the reasons for delayed discharge, getting our drug regimens right, improving our huddles of how we progress patients in a multidisciplinary way each day. And that improves our patient flow through the hospital and has allowed us to treat more patients through the same number of beds. We're a leading regional and national implementer of virtual clinics. We still see the highest proportion of patients virtually in North Central London, even though we're in a more kind of business as usual time. And right at the beginning of COVID, we transformed the proportion of patients that we saw virtually from 5% pre-COVID to over 80% in just 3 weeks. And we used the Rapid Learning Coordinator role in support of planning and delivering the COVID vaccination program, so that we could rapidly implement improvements as we went, learning as we went with the implementation of that vaccination program. Next slide, please. We've also been working, as Leela said, on involving patients more in our improvement work, and we still have some way to go on that, but we've been working, staff from the hospital led by our improvement team and a group of patients have worked together on a new patient charter, patient and staff charter, and it starts with agreed statements from a patient perspective of what a patient can expect when they're here. So I am listened to, I'm given information that is relevant to me in a way that I understand. I'm supported to understand my condition, to help me manage my risk and my everyday life, and a number of statements like that came from our patients that we've signed up to. And we're in the process of now developing a set of responding statements from a hospital perspective about what it is that we will do to make sure that we respect that those charter statements for our patients. We undertook a big programme of learning from COVID after the first wave, where there were facilitated discussions with staff from across the organisation in what we called what is known as an after-action review, where staff talked about how the first wave of COVID had been for them, their hopes, their disappointments, their feelings, ways that we could have handled things better, and a number of changes were implemented in both our planning and the implementation of our response to Wave 2 as a result of that after-action review work, and it was published across the hospital. And it led to a greater degree of understanding, I think, of what it was really like for the many different groups of staff involved in responding to COVID in such different ways, from staff who had to take their whole work home and to work at home with no contact with site, to those staff who went and worked in intensive care units in other hospitals in unfamiliar environments. And more recently, we've become involved nationally leading the Orthopaedic Quality Improvement and Clinical Audit Network, which is under the auspices of the National Orthopaedic Alliance, which is a group and a programme to share learning across orthopaedic hospitals and services across the country, so that we can share our good improvement practice and ideas with one another and implement more rapid positive change. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lucy, and many really good projects there. Can I just echo your comments about the length of stay work at Duke of Gloucester and London Irish? I mean, so length of stay is a real marker of excellence in clinical process. Good for patients if they're not staying they're not got unnecessary waits to be discharged. Good for patients that we want to see, because it frees up capacity to do that, and it's good for use of taxpayers' money. So a win on all fronts, and really hard, and that amount of change is really very dramatic. So just echo the thanks to the teams involved in that.
And I should absolutely credit John Doyle, who's with us today, our Director of Therapies, Director of Allied Health, because he's led that work, which has involved staff from a whole number of different disciplines, but he's coordinated it all. So thank you and well done, John.
Echo that, John, and do pass that on to your teams as well. So any questions at this point? Right, I'm going to keep going, and we now move on to our financial review. And this is, Caroline, this is your first full year as our Chief Financial Officer. And what a year to be given the job of managing the money. So over to you.
Thank you, Dominic. And you are right, you know, the year started off, I think I started at the trust just before the pandemic, and you know, some of the changes we saw in the financial regime were so drastic, and the changes were so often that keeping on track of it meant a lot of bedtime reading and making sure that we're on top of everything, and also making sure that this organization got the money that it needed to do the things that it needed to do. The good thing is, as you've all heard, there's been a lot of good work that's happened in the year. However, we couldn't have done all of that if the money wasn't working and we had to worry about how our financial position was going, and the regulators were on our back because of our deficits. You probably know and probably heard in the news, the financial regime in the last year was somewhat different, and we were under some block arrangement throughout the year. And that block included money to pay for things that were COVID related and had to be done, both for COVID-related capital and COVID-related revenue, and also included some financial support for our non-NHS income, which is our private care income and other sources of income that dried up. As you all know, with the lockdown and everything else that happened, there was no travel, and therefore we couldn't see patients. Our international patient market was way down. And apart from that, we had to support the COVID efforts, and therefore all our beds were ring-fenced and dedicated to making sure that we were a hospital that could support the system. So what did the finances look like? We had a surplus of 1.8 million for the year and a favourable variance to plan of 2.7 million. The COVID financial arrangements is wholly responsible for this, because if you cast your mind back, in the prior year we had a deficit, and therefore to turn it around in such a short time, you might think we'd work some magic. It wasn't down to any magic, it was just the way the funding worked that year. Next slide, please. The other thing that we did was we spent about £10.3 million of capital money, and thank you to the RNOH charity, we're able to fund our SPEC CT, which was just under £1 million, and then our usual capital funded the rest, which was other medical equipment, and then the charity also funded the Horatius Garden, which I would encourage you to visit next time you're on site. It's a beautiful garden. I've visited it myself, and the money provides a good respite for our patients. And then we spent a little bit on estates, just backlog maintenance, and then for projects relating to COVID, we spent 1.1 million. Some of that expenditure was just helping us to make sure that we had a site that was infection prevention and control managed, and it was safe for people to come to work, and it was safe for our patients to visit us. The trust was able to meet its financial targets in certain areas, and there were a couple of financial targets that we didn't meet. We met the control total. The control total we're given that year was a surplus of 0.8. As you heard, we overachieved that. We met our external financial limit and our capital resource limit. So the capital that we spent was within the limit that we were set for that year. Where we did not achieve our targets were around the Better Payment Practice Code, which is that we pay invoices up to 30 days, within 30 days. 78% of our invoices were paid, and as you can see there, we fell a little short. We've got a targeted approach to making sure that when we come round again, we will not fall short of that. We've implemented an automated invoicing system, which is working great to help speed up some of the processes around our invoice payments as well. We also did not meet our break-even duty. We should have met it. It's one of those measures that's measured over 3 consecutive years. So even though we had a surplus, we still did not meet it. And our external auditors have, as a result of that, written to the Secretary of State as per guidance. Next slide, please. So what does the forward look like? So for this current financial year we're in, we had funding arrangements for the first 6 months. And just last week, we received a headline briefing of what the funding is going to look like for the second 6 months. That's from October to March. So for the agreed plan, we had a plan of 0.6 million for surplus for the first 6 months. And the revised financial framework remains in place, so we are largely on block. And the guidance on October to March will be issued imminently, but I can give you just a sneak preview. We'll continue to be on block. Some of the funding we received for non-NHS income will be withdrawn because it is perceived that borders are opening. We're starting to be able to do more than we did in the last year. So there are changes that are coming down the line. There will be an efficiency requirement of about 3% as well, which the trust is working towards. So even though we had an agreed financial plan of 6 months, what we try to do with our clinical divisions is plan the whole year ahead. So we have plans in place to make sure that we are using the money that we get as efficiently and as economically as possible. So I think that brings me to the end of my slides. No, I've got one more. The forward look on capital is a total planned spend of 13.3 million. And this is how it breaks down on what we're going to spend it on. This year, our capital allocation was slightly higher than we've had in previous years. And I'm hoping that going forward, we'll be able to maintain that. If you visited Stanmore before, we have a very nice, shiny new building, but we have a lot of our estate that's falling over, and therefore we need to take care of it. And what would be really ideal is if we could build the rest of the site up, but we are working, plans are in place to work towards some of that. I think the financial targets for, is that another slide, please, Jenny? Or have I come to the end of my slides?
Yeah. I think that's the end, Caroline.
That's the end of my slides. So I think the key messages I'll leave you with is, as an organisation, we are ever increasingly working to make sure that the money we get spread to every patient we can possibly treat within the financial envelope. We have work in place to make sure that we deliver our services as efficiently as possible. Our board have set us a challenging target to bring our cost base down, and we are making sure that we do that efficiently, and not because we just want to bring our cost base down, but because we want the money to stretch further to see more patients. So I'll pause there. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Caroline. And just to say, I think the number of times that the guidance changed, just as you'd had to work, you and Jenny and Rochelle and others had to work through it, I lost count. And so thank you for the versatility that you showed and the team showed in keeping our money on track. Suren.
Thank you, Dominic. And I know we've been through an incredibly financially challenging environment, and I would like to congratulate Caroline and the finance team for their incredible work in producing all the financial information on time and to an exactingly high standard. It's been quite tremendously inspiring for me to watch how she's managed her team managed throughout this period, keeping the RNOH financially well sighted through this period. Nothing was missed, everything was produced on time and to the standard that we would expect in a normal year. And coupled with this, and again to their credit, the finance team under Caroline maintained a very well controlled financial environment, and that has to be acknowledged and applauded given the remote working model we were forced to move to. So congratulations, Caroline and the finance team.
Thanks very much, Suren. Jane.
I was impressed to see the new logo, which I don't think I'd seen on anything before. So the RNOH private care logo has appeared, and that's a really good sign. I know, Caroline, you're particularly involved in this work, and congratulations for getting the logo. We're very keen now to actually put it into action, if we may.
Thank you, Jane. I think we realized when our branding was not enough, and I think steps have been taken to get us there. Thank you.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, Caroline has the distinction of having the only section which is legally required under this AGM. So our formal business is to receive the accounts and to which are all outlined in detail in the in the annual report. So, and thanks to all involved in producing that. I know it can be a painful process. So we note and receive the accounts for the year to April 21. And with that, I omitted to mention one particular development of the year, which is, of course, the appointment of our chief executive at the end of the year, our new chief executive. And that comes with a tinge of sadness to lose Rob Hurd, who's been the chief executive of the RNOH for many years, and everyone knows and loves well. And we are determined to give a good send-off to at the right moment, so we will do that. So just to note everyone's thanks to Rob, and to pass over to our new leader. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Dominic. Very big shoes to fill, both literally and figuratively. Welcome everybody to the AGM. My name's Paul. I'm the Chief Executive and still currently Chief Nurse until we appoint later on this week. Before I talk about the future, there's just two things I wanted to say. Firstly, this week, colleagues, patients who are Jewish are celebrating an important period of time. Sukkot, I think I've pronounced it correctly, started yesterday and goes through until Monday of next week. And yesterday and today are very important days within that festival. So my apologies for people that couldn't be here today because they're celebrating. Where we can, we'll try and avoid significant days going forward. I also wanted to say thank you, but that word doesn't quite feel significant enough. We've been through what is such a significant worldwide event that I don't think I'm being melodramatic to say that it will be in the history books in the future. And the people of this organisation and of every NHS organisation have helped to get the country through that really significant event. So I will say thank you, but I want you to know that it's the biggest thank you that I can possibly say for everything that you've done over the course of the last 18 months. You have been absolutely amazing as a team, because of all the things that colleagues have said so far that we've managed to achieve over the course of this year. So going on to the future then, the future's bright. The last 18 months has provided us with all kinds of opportunities to think about how we can become more sustainable as an organisation and how we can spread the excellent care that you and others that can't be on this call provide for our patients. At our core as we move forward is always going to be world-leading tertiary MSK services. That's the DNA of the RNOH, and that's always going to be there forevermore. But we want to extend that expertise to greater populations of patients, and we want to do that in a few different ways. Firstly, we want to extend it to our local population by working in closer partnership with organisations within North Central London. We don't just happen to sit in North Central London and provide services for a wider population. We want to be part of that community of North Central London. And the last 18 months has really enabled us to build those partnerships to a much stronger level than they previously have been. We've always historically been involved in the complex end of the patient pathway, but actually there's a real opportunity for us to bring that expertise to less complex parts of the pathway, into the secondary care pathway, and in particular through our partnerships with the Royal Free Hospital Group and the Chase Farm Hospital, to influence and to lead. If I could just go back to that last slide, sorry, Jen, to influence and to lead secondary care, healthcare in Chase Farm, but also to get into really exciting new models of care. So first contact care, what internally we're calling Specsavers for bones. And the reason we're calling it that is because when we use that term, everybody knows exactly what we mean in terms of what the model would look like. We can't achieve any of that without our people. And we want this to be the best place to work in the NHS. Lucy and I were talking earlier on, I think it was this week, I'll look to Lucy to nod in a second. And Lucy was saying that when we started the journey around improving our experience in the organisation 7 years ago, I think it was, and we said that we had an ambition to have the best staff experience in the NHS. I think at that point we thought, are we really going to be able to achieve this? And actually, when you look at the stratospheric improvement that we've had in our staff experience in our staff survey over the course of the last 7 years, then it feels absolutely reasonable for me to say that I want us to have the best staff experience in the NHS, bar none. And for some indicators, we're already there. We have the best engagement scores of any organisation anywhere in the NHS. Our staff tell us that they have the best health, wellbeing and motivation of any NHS trust in London and of any specialist organisation nationally. And our staff say they provide the best levels of care of any NHS trust in London and any specialist organisation nationally. You should all be really proud of that. That's not the lived experience of everybody though. And we know that there's average experience for people, in particular in relation to equality, diversity and inclusion and bullying and harassment. And average scores in those two indicators I'm not willing to accept, because they're very sensitive indicators to what it feels like to work in this organisation. And so there's much more that we need to do in order to make sure that I can really say that this is the best place to work in the NHS. And in achieving all of those ambitions, ultimately we become more sustainable as an organisation as well. So we have 3 pillars that we're trying to achieve. So we can go to the next slide, Jen. So the first is growth. We currently have a turnover as an organisation of about £140 million per year, which, whilst that sounds like a huge amount of money, it's certainly more than I will ever have in my lifetime. In NHS terms, we are a small organisation, and that provides challenges for our long-term sustainability. We need to be bigger, and there's 4 ways that we think that we can grow. Firstly, we want to grow our tertiary services. We currently do 57% of the tertiary commissioned activity for London happens here at the RNOH. 100% of the spinal cord activity happens here at the RNOH. We're in the top 2 providers in London in terms of complex spinal surgery, and between us and St George's we do 44% of the tertiary activity. But what we want to grow to is to be doing 30% of the national activity happening here at the RNOH. And to do that, we need to invest in infrastructure, and we've already talked about some of the things that we're going to do. One obvious example being an expansion of our theatres to give more space for us to grow that tertiary activity into. We also want to grow into new parts of the pathway, as I mentioned before. So first contact care, high street based, direct access. Don't need to go and see your GP, just walking off the street, see an allied health professional and get treatment for your bone problem in the same way that you'd walking off the street and see somebody about an eye problem, and a model that we've been using in our communities since the 50s. So we want to grow that so that we have a presence on all of the high streets in north central London ultimately, and we're going to start that in Enfield. And John Doyle, who's on this call, is our senior leader who's leading that for the organisation with many organisations across NCL. And we also think we've got something to offer to secondary care. The number of patients who are waiting for secondary care intervention in north central London is absolutely huge, and there's real opportunity for us to bring our expertise to help with managing that demand, also identifying new pathways of care for patients, making sure that we've got the best outcomes and efficiency for our patients in north central London. We want to grow our academic presence, and Leela is leading that from an executive point of view. And I think I saw we have Eva on the call as well, and others that will be involved in that. We need to continue to be ambitious about what we can achieve from an academic point of view, because it comes with the badge of national, in my view. If we're going to be a tertiary national centre, then there's a responsibility to add to the knowledge base of our speciality. And this is therefore an important growth part of our strategy. And then finally, and Jay mentioned, as you can see on the slides, we've got private care there. Private care is a very important part of our growth. Every penny we get back from private practice income, we'll be investing into the organisation, into the professional and personal development of the people that work in our organisation, into our patients. So it's makes absolute sense that we try to grow our private practice from our current £8 million a year to £60 million a year over the course of the next few years. Next slide, Jen. As I mentioned before, we can't do any of that without our people. You're such an important, integral part to us delivering our strategy, and we want this to be the best place for you to work. And so we're going to really concentrate for the course of this year and until we fix it on equality, diversity and inclusion and bullying and harassment. But we also want to think about how we develop really strong career pathways, professional developments for our staff working here, but also as we think about system, all of the people who are working in orthopaedics and MSK care within the system, how we can develop a really strong system-wide workforce. Next slide, Jen. We need to make the best use of the resources that we've got, and there's predominantly two ways that we're going to concentrate on that over the short and medium term. The first is by looking at our clinical efficiency and trying to fix one measure in particular initially, which is our length of stay. And the reason that that measure is really, really important is because we need to try and treat as many patients as we possibly can over the course of the next number of months and years, because the waiting list has grown significantly over the course of the pandemic. We're trying to approve a business case currently, which will increase our theatres from 10 to 14, but we're going to need a bed base in order to do that additional activity through. And therefore, it's important that we make the best possible use of the bed base that we currently have. And so jointly, Leela as Chief Medical Officer and Lucy as Chief Operating Officer and Director of Strategy and Improvement are leading a programme with others on the call, I think, to not only improve our length of stay, but to embed that. And I note the fantastic work that's already been done on London Irish Ward and Duke of Gloucester Ward. And then we need to identify, as the second part of our efficiency drive, are there opportunities for us to work with other organisations and bigger organisations within North Central London to provide some of the services that we currently do in potentially a more efficient way, but also a much more resilient way. For example, we're currently going through a process of looking through the shared service model at our recruitment services across North Central London. And what this will provide for North Central London is a very, very big recruitment service for the access to the latest technologies. That means that where we currently might suffer from sickness in a smaller team, leading to difficulty of the service being able to operate in a much bigger team, that will be much more sustainable. And there will be other services as we go along that we'll look to see whether that model is best for the organisation. Next slide, Jen. So there are a number of things that we think will enable those three pillars of growth, people and efficiency. The first is clinical partnerships. We want to reach out to many different organisations and create partnerships and closer working. We've talked a lot over the course of the last number of months around our very important partnership, clinical partnership with the Royal Free Group, looking at secondary care and first contact care. But we're also in conversation currently with Great Ormond Street to develop a partnership around paediatric care. Our national partnerships of the National Orthopaedic Alliance and the Federation of Specialist Hospitals remain critically important to us. And the partnership that Dominic mentioned earlier, the UCL Health Alliance, the Provider Alliance for North Central London, is going to be critically important for us as well. We think that we have a key role in system leadership of orthopaedics over the coming months and years. A role of leading how we deal with the huge numbers of patients who are waiting for care within North Central London. We also think that it's key that we think about sustainability as we start to deliver our strategy. We are required to develop and publish a green plan by early next year, as is every NHS organisation. But actually, I want us to get to a place where we create a movement within the organisation so that we're motivated not just by the requirement to produce a document, as every NHS organisation is, but that we're equally motivated as individuals and as citizens to try and do our bit to reduce the impact of global warming. We're the biggest employer in Europe, and we really, really can make a difference to this agenda if we change the way that we work, the way that we procure, the way that we buy our energy, the way that we travel to work, the pathways for our patients. There's much work that we can do over the course of the coming months and years. And finally, all of that needs to be underpinned by a clear approach to digital within the organisation. And Leela has already mentioned a couple of the very important digital projects that are currently underway. We're currently in the process of applying to NHS England for some funding to develop a business case to procure a full electronic patient record system. And we'll be able to talk about that both with staff and patients more over the course of the coming months and years. So that's the future strategy for the organisation. I think it's a very exciting time for us. It's an opportunity for us to influence the care of much larger groups of patients and to bring our expertise, our international and national expertise, to North Central London whilst improving our sustainability as an organisation. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Paul. And so I'm going to throw it open to any questions that anyone would like to ask, either in chat or by raising your hand. And this can go one of two ways. This can be the stunned silence with no hands and no questions, which is fine, or a pile-on. So up to you guys. Any burning questions for anyone on any of the topics we've covered? Okay, I'll take that as stunned silence. So it just leaves it with me to wrap up. So I'd like to thank all of the executive directors who have spoken. Thank you very much for being so clear and sticking to time and answering the questions that you had. And more generally to the executive team, you've led the organisation through a very tricky time, and I wanted to thank you for the way in which you've done that and what you've achieved over the last year. I also wanted to thank my non-executive colleagues who don't generally get much of a look in, but James, Seren, Doris, Gabby, Becky. You're a fantastic team to work with. It's quite a tricky job because you have to kind of balance being challenging, but at the same time not being too irritating. And I think you do that beautifully, and you're very supportive to me. So thank you. And then I'll just finish before giving Paul the final word. I wanted to thank everyone here for attending and listening, and for those who are going to watch afterwards. And thank you for everything that you have all individually done over the course of the year we've been reviewing. Paul, over to you.
Yes, Dominic, thank you. You reminded me of a thank you that I wanted to make, which was to the non-executive directors, because we are a new board, and to come in as a new board as a pandemic starts, to know when to step back and to give the executive team some time to manage operationally, to, as you say, hit that challenge note just right, has been absolutely fantastic. And in my first year as a chief executive as well, personally, the support of the non-executives has been great. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. The agenda says that we finish at 2:20. It's 2:19. So I shall declare victory before it hits 2:20. Thank you all very much, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.